My name is David Small, Rabbi of the Emanuel Synagogue, and I'm here just to say a word of welcome to everyone who came out this morning and to thank our sponsors, the Emanuel Synagogue Brotherhood, JFACT, and the Jewish Community Relations Council of the Jewish Federation of Greater Hartford. Alexis de Tocqueville, in his great work, Democracy in America, wrote that the strength of America was built on the engagement of its citizens that come together to hear, listen, debate, and discuss the issues of the day amongst each other and with their leaders. And it is citizenry engagement that is the heartbeat of a democratic system. So I want to commend everyone who is here today for not only showing engagement and interest, but by your presence and participation in this electoral process, helping to strengthen the overall health and integrity of our community, our state, and our nation. And I'm delighted to introduce Deb Polun from the Jewish Community Relations Council to open today's program. Once again, welcome.
Good morning again. As Rabbi Small indicated, my name is Deb Polun. I'm the chair of the Government Relations Task Force of the Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Hartford, which is a program of the Jewish Federation of Greater Hartford. I'm delighted to share my morning with all of you and with the rest of the candidates who will be here later on this morning. I wanted to just quickly call out a few thank yous. First, Michael Bloom from the Jewish Federation Association of Connecticut. Bob Teller and the entire Emanuel Brotherhood. From the Jewish Federation, Howard Savronsky, Laura Zimmerman, Goldie Singh, Deb Housen, the chair of the Jewish Federation Board, Carrie Lackenbach, Bob Blitzer, the chair of the Jewish Community Relations Council, Rabbi Small, for hosting us today, and all of you for being here this Sunday morning. As 501c3 nonprofit organizations, we are all nonpartisan. We do not endorse any political candidate or any political party. So today is a goal to help you become more informed about your choices for governor of the state of Connecticut, their positions, and their thoughts, particularly on issues of special importance to the Jewish community. For today's forum, we have 3 candidates here, and they will each have their own 30 minutes on the stage. The 3 candidates are Griebel, Bob Stefanowski, and Ned Lamont. Each candidate will speak very briefly, and then you will have an opportunity to ask the questions that are most important to you in helping to make your decision. There are no planted questions in the audience, and the hosts of this forum will not be asking any questions. It's all up to you and what is on your mind, so start thinking. I will call on audience members as we go, so please raise your hand if you have a question, and we'll bring you the microphone. Please respect the fact that there are more people in this room who will have an opportunity to ask questions. So what that means is we need you to keep your questions brief. No speechies, no speechifying, just get to the question. And that way we can move along and get as many questions in as we can in the 30-minute time frame. Everybody good? All right, and we'll keep you on track with that. So it's now my pleasure to invite our first candidate up, Mr. Griebel. Mr. Griebel is running for governor as an independent candidate. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Deb. Appreciate it. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. I hope you did notice that my tie and yarmulke are color coordinated. I appreciate the comments that I've already received, and I've already told the folks where I planted the questions to be brief, so thank you for following the following the rules. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. This is an extraordinary forum, and hats off to all of you who have been involved in it. This is what what makes democracy work. So thank you for the organization. Thank you for the time. My running mate, Monty Frank, who is out going to various fairs right now, will be down in Stamford on Monday talking with a similar group being organized by the Jewish Community Center down in Stamford. As was said, there's not enough time to go through all things, so I just want to make sure you know our website is osforgovct.com. Our plan is on there. All the details are on there. You can certainly send a question into us, and I'm reasonably good about getting back in a fairly prompt manner. So if there are questions you don't get answered here today, don't get a chance to ask, please by all means send them in. We'd also welcome these kind of opportunities. Are extraordinarily important to us. So if you have any places of employment, other civic groups that you'd be willing to invite us to, please don't hesitate to do that. This is what Retail Politics 101 is about, and so the opportunity, more opportunities like this are critical to us in the last 4 weeks. You also have an opportunity to contribute, to support the campaign. We're not participating in public financing. We're raising money the old-fashioned way. We are begging for it, so please feel free to help us in that regard. The 2 points I would just make to and then open it up to questions is that we are running not on the independent ticket. I'll just make sure on November 6th you go to the bottom line. That's where you will find Oz Griebel and Monty Frank. You'll go Lamont, Stefanowski, Lamont, Amigo Party, Libertarian Party, and there will be the gift that you're looking for is on that bottom line. So keep scrolling down. But we believe that only an independent candidate, independent governor, independent lieutenant governor can bring both parties together and engage the private sector, business, the faith community, not-for-profits, higher education, hospitals, and the like. That only by working together, only by recognizing that we're all in this together, are we going to both promote the strong asset base that we have in the state and address the very serious fiscal impediments to the future. So that's the spirit of it. And Connecticut can be the model for civility and collaboration and honest debate about moving the state forward. Our goal is to return Connecticut to national preeminence, not only on employment growth, but on all quality of life issues. And the last thing I just say is that our overarching goal is we review the first budget that we'll submit next February, that we'll start work on November 7th. All decisions that Monty and I make over particularly in that first budget session, will be targeted on whether that decision enhances Connecticut's ability to grow on a net basis 200,000 new private sector jobs in the state over the next 10 years. We've had zero net job growth in the state in 30, which has led to more taxes at higher rates and to the outmigration of talent at all age levels and all income levels. So this is about restoring, reigniting private sector confidence among residents and employers to get that to regenerate that kind of job growth and be able to have the revenues by more people paying taxes rather than raising taxes and rates that will allow us to fund education, transportation, and supporting our not-for-profits to deal with the most vulnerable. So with that, I appreciate thank you again for the opportunity, and I'll look forward to taking your questions. I know the planted one is out there somewhere. If somebody would raise their hand quickly.
So if you have a question, please raise your hand, and I will recognize the first 2 questions once I see hands raised. There's one over here. Do I have Ken with the roving microphone?
So we're going to take the end of the second row, and who else? Anyone in the back? So I can get so we're splitting the roving microphones front and back, so I'm trying to rotate. So if there's anyone in the back who has a question, raise your hand nice and high so I can see. No one in the back. All right.
So Bob will go to start our second.
I reported meeting you at another meeting, and I'm very impressed because you emphasized how you were going to get where you were going to get the combination of making jobs, not doing a lot of taxes.
Right.
And then I see on TV.
Only commercial going on saying, forgive me, let's cut taxes,
Right.
taxes, slamming back and forth. I was impressed that your emphasis had nothing to do with the other candidates. What's your I don't really have any questions here.
I love that. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I'm glad we had a chance to meet before. Getting at this budget issue, this notion that you're going to take a $4.6 billion operating deficit on essentially a $40 billion operating deficit, about which 40% on 12:01 a.m. on July 1st of next year will already be committed to debt service, funding employee pensions, and funding retiree health care. This is not a game for children. And the notion that you'd be able to balance that budget on cutting personal income tax, if you believe that, I've got several bridges I'd be happy to sell you on my way out the door. And the notion that you're going to solve it by restoring the property tax credit, which is really an income tax credit, this is a lot of nonsense that is insulting the electorate in this state. Most people I talk to in this state fully understand that the idea that you're going to cut taxes, particularly in this first biennium with a $4.6 billion operating deficit, is absolute fiction, falsehood, outright falsehood. And that's true anytime you're trying to touch the revenue base is going to be extremely difficult. I believe the personal income tax is the workhorse tax. It should stay in the system for the long term. Can we reduce rates? Absolutely. The 2 points that we've made consistently is we want to do the least amount of harm in this first biennium budget while we're setting structural change in place for the next 2 or 3 budget cycles after. And what I mean by that is we would look at bringing all the rainy day fund in to reduce the $4.6 billion operating deficit down to something under 2.6. So roughly the projection is about $2 billion in the rainy day fund that'll be available next July 1st, and bring that in over the 2 years. The second point we've made is that we will look at some very what has been called risky approaches of not doing things like not funding for 2 years, postponing the funding of 2 years of the contributions to the state retiree fund and the teachers retiree fund, because we've got a plan about how we will fix that problem for the long term. But we cannot do further damage to municipalities, and we cannot do further damage to not-for-profits, either state agencies or others, that are serving the most vulnerable among us, and we can't keep cutting investment in transportation. So we have to be adults about this. We have to look at both the opportunity and the problem and make sure that we're doing things that are right for the state of Connecticut over the long term, not what's good for one particular constituency.
Thank you. We'll go here, and then the next question, Ken, will be the person in the pink.
Oh, sorry about that.
Okay. Thank you for that first answer. The Jewish community has been very much engaged in bringing the relationship between businesses in Israel and businesses here in Connecticut.
Right.
And I know that you're very much aware of that.
Right.
I would like to know how you plan to continue that.
Yep.
So that we can see further growth in that realm.
Thank you for the question. And yes, we at the Metro Hartford Alliance, we've been heavily involved I've made 2 trips to Israel, one with DECD and one with the University of Connecticut, to make sure that I understood more about what the opportunities are. But we spent a lot of time at the Alliance making sure that we're courting the Jewish community here, the Jewish Community Center, a number of folks in this, may even be in this audience, that have been vital to positioning Connecticut, both in terms of the Jewish community that is here. It's one of the great strengths we have, is being able to tell businesses in Israel, come to Connecticut. You don't have to go to New York or Boston. You'll have greater access, lower cost in Connecticut, even though we're a highly cost state in many ways. We're a real deal compared to greater New York and greater Boston. So the whole notion, and DECD has been involved in some of that. One of the things that I've talked about, the governor has to be the chief economic development officer for the state. I have to be the chief marketing officer for the state. And making sure that I have regular discussions with the Jewish community here, with Jewish leaders as appropriate, making trips to Israel, but more importantly, working with the extraordinary asset base we have right here to say, what are things that you want to see government do, not necessarily by giving more tax breaks, because the money is drying up, let me assure you, but the idea of making sure that Israeli companies are welcomed here, that the right bridges are being built into both the business community and the local communities is absolutely critical. It's a great opportunity for us as Israeli companies are looking to expand into the United States marketplace, and Connecticut, for a whole series of reasons, ought to be the logical landing place for their beachheads.
Thank you.
Let's take over here, and the woman in the pink, yeah. And then after that, we're going to, is there anyone in the back? Right in the back in the blue.
So you mentioned that you want to bring 200,000 jobs to
Correct.
Connecticut. When you were the president of Metro Hartford Alliance,
Right.
you brought the Niagara Bottling Company,
Right.
which privatizes water, which is against the UN stand on water,
Yep.
which should not be privatized. while raising the rates, increasingly raising the rates. We just got another rate increase for the NBC water supply for 8 towns.
Right.
Just this new bill that I just got in the mail about a week ago.
Right.
All this for less than 75 low-paying jobs. Is that the kind of job that you plan on bringing to Connecticut? And I'm not even talking about the
Right.
environmental aspect of the plastic
Right.
and the pollution related to that coming to Connecticut.
So quickly, if a low-paying job is not necessarily low-paying to the person who has the job. So I want to be clear that while we're going to target jobs with higher median wages in research and precision manufacturing and the like, that's where the revenue, that's where both the opportunity for people to provide a livable, provide for their families is critically there. The MDC recruited Niagara. Niagara came here looking for that. We supported it. We didn't bring them here. I recognize there are issues on plastic. We've been talking to a number of folks involved in the environmental issue in terms, that's a national issue. It's not, doesn't belong just to Connecticut. So there are issues in there, but I'm not at all ashamed that we were helpful in bringing 75 to 80 jobs that were available for a company that had very minimal impact on the environment and pay taxes on their commercial base. So I'm happy to take it offline with another longer conversation with you, but I'm not apologetic at all for what we did in supporting the MDC on that. Correct. Correct. And we disclosed that. We didn't do anything to do. We've got 15 companies that paid us $100,000 a year. And just remember, the MDC costs have everything to do with the sewer separation project that's been underway for 5 or 6 years. I would argue that cost may even be higher if you didn't have Niagara here.
All right, we're going to go to the next question over in the back, and after that, we're going to come right up here in the second row.
Good morning, Oz.
Yes. Well, okay.
The concept of doing the least amount of harm possible, something
Right.
that I support, as you have to make a lot of tough decisions. Where does regionalization,
Yep.
working with municipalities to do some regional services, fit into you and Monty's plan?
It's a big deal. I want to be really clear. We are talking about structural change. Everything from how we deal with the unfunded pension liability to how we how we control our costs in the municipalities, to how we privatize certain services that the state provides today, but doesn't need to necessarily be done by state employees. This all has to be part of the discussion. So I've been a long-standing champion, like many of you in this room, or at least some of you in this room, for looking at regional delivery of municipal services. The old joke is, had Columbus landed somewhere out on the West Coast, there'd be one state from Maine to Florida, and all those congregational churches would have been out in Oregon and Washington. It would have been their problem. It's a great history that we have here. And it enables people to have greater control over things like zoning and what kind of community they want. But the idea that we can have 169 or 162 or 158 of everything just flies in the face of the challenges that we're facing. We don't have more open space in the state. We're not Texas, we're not Florida. So how we use the tax dollars that we generate, whether it be on the state tax side or on the local tax side, have to be used far more intelligently. So here's my example. I'm not in favor of county government, but I do believe the councils of governments are under-leveraged here in the region. The one I'm most familiar with is the one here in Greater Hartford, the Connecticut, the Capital Region Council of Governments. 39 towns. I think it's the single largest cog of the 7 or 8 that are here in Connecticut. So here's my hypothetical. If each one of those each one of the 39 towns today receives $100, West Hartford and everybody else, those 39 towns each receive $100. In our first budget, each town will receive 50. And the delta of 50 times 39 will go to the COG. Now, each municipality has a vote on the COG. They could simply put their hand up and say, give us our $50 back and leave us alone. Or ideally, it will be an incentive to see where can we begin to drive for appropriate reasons on consolidation of municipal services. I mean, do we need 169, 162 superintendents? Do we need 165 police chiefs? We've got to be a lot smarter. And I recognize, the old adage of the old definition of insanity is reproducing the same old processes, failed processes over and over again, and expecting a different result. What Monty and I are saying, we've got to come at this in a much more imaginative, much more collaborative way. Now, in order to do that, it's going to take several years because each town has negotiated independently with their police unions, with their fire unions, and with their teachers. So this isn't going to happen just because Monty and I get up there and say we want it to happen, but I'm giving it as an example of how we think and where I think the state needs to go in a very deliberate way over the next 6 to 8 years on something like regional delivery of municipal services.
Given the vitriolic state of national politics and how everyone is denigrating everyone else, but the people that make the most money at election time are the printers and media people. But that being said, is it possible to get political statements out that reflect the candidates' opinions and possibilities rather than just denigrating their opponents? And unfortunately, Mr. Griebel, I find your latest ads to be the most offensive.
On the puppet one?
Ed Lamont and Bob Stefanowski.
Okay, well, you're the first one who said that. I appreciate that. We've gotten great compliments on it, to be honest with you, but I appreciate the comment. The idea that you're going to do something on television is not my idea of where you ought to be commenting. I mean, to get excluded from 2 debates, I think was horrific in terms of undermining the democratic process. So take a look at the television station that locked us out of the first 2 debates, because that's where you get a chance to talk. I think we had a great chance at the debate at UConn a week ago to make sure everybody knows where I stand on things, as opposed to a lot of pablum. That you've got these, cut the income tax, we're going to do things on, just trust me. I mean, that's what you're getting, in my opinion, from the two other candidates. So I think the debate was critical. I think opportunities like this, where you get a chance to kick the tires on me directly, is great. As I said earlier, our mantra is we'll go anywhere, anytime, any place to talk to 220 or 200 people. So if there's other opportunities, you want to have us to your home, I welcome that chance where you get a chance to push back, just like I did on that Niagara water question. We're not going to agree on everything. I have no illusions about that. But I think the idea of having bone-deep respect for every person, which is what I believe I've reflected in all my life. I've had vigorous disagreements, including with a few people in this room on issues. But I believe that I've always treated people with respect, understood that their desire to make Connecticut great is no different than mine. We've got a difference of opinion how to get there. The Channel 3 interview today with Dennis House, which we'll post on our website, I think gives you another chance. That was 30 minutes of that. I'll be on. Stan Simpson is taping one on Monday. Again for 30 minutes. So I think you'll have ample opportunity to really kick the tires with me to go well beyond that. But the beauty of ads is you've got 30 seconds, given the fact of the limited finances we have, to capture who we are. And what we're saying is we're not controlled by anybody. And I would disagree with you. I do think it was an accurate depiction of the relationships that both candidates have with their respective
You talked about adding 200,000 jobs. What is your view on giving huge tax incentives to those people who, businesses, to bring them in?
I am totally opposed to the First 5 program, which is now 15. I don't know where they came up with the name First 5, but and I'm not even a great believer in the so-called Small Business Express. I think that's what banks are in the business to do, and I'm happy to talk about any of that in detail. I believe that tax dollars that we all generate, that we all pay, should be used for programs and investments that benefit all employers, whether that's businesses, hospitals, higher education, and not-for-profits. So investing in transportation infrastructure, particularly in making sure that the I-95 corridor, it doesn't turn into a parking lot any worse than it is. So our 2 biggest assets in this state are our proximity to Boston and New York. If this state was next to North Dakota, I wouldn't be running, because it would be a whole different dynamic. But the idea of having regular linkage into 2 of the most important economic bases in the world, Boston and New York, we have to make sure the transportation system is there. Our higher education, our K through 12 education, dealing with this horrific disparity in performance in our inner city schools, our urban schools versus our suburban schools. That to me is where the money, because that's where the future workforce is going to come from. And I'll just give you 2 other ideas. I'm not totally sure why Governor Malloy approved I think it was a $35 million workforce development grant with Electric Boat, which was directed to Electric Boat. As important as Electric Boat is right now, they're generating somewhere in the 15,000 to 16,000 net new jobs over the next 3 years, I believe, because of the submarine contracts. The idea that you would give a grant to them without bringing in all the smaller companies that are in the supply chain does not make any sense to me. And a couple of days later, the governor vetoed a $750,000 apprenticeship program that had been passed unanimously in both chambers, only to have his veto supported. That program would have been available to any company that was interested in bringing in someone particularly into the precision manufacturing area. So the idea of using your dollars, our dollars, for targeted, betting on winners and losers is just a totally inappropriate use of money. The idea of going out and making sure that I, as chief marketing officer, are spending on a regular basis, meeting with current employers, businesses, not-for-profits, hospitals and the like, to see what are the things we can do by reducing mandates, making sure that regulations are more easily complied with, making sure that they understand what we're trying to get done, making sure that employers in the state know that they're loved is an important element of how you're going to get 200,000 net new jobs in here. It means we're going to close the back door so that the jobs that are here today stay here. The next job that an employer adds is in Connecticut and not in South Carolina or New Hampshire, and that they understand some of the things that we're trying to do to move the state in the right direction structurally, so you don't have to have this chant that no employer wants to be here, that no employer wants to be the last one here to turn the lights out. To me, it's a combination of continued salesmanship and making sure that everybody's confident that the tax dollars that you're paying are going into things that are treating everybody equally.
Thank you. We have here, we have one in the back next, but first,
Hi. I wanted to find out your position on privatization of state employees and contracting outside of the state.
Oh, sorry. I knew I'd get there eventually. I got thrown off. That was a good head fake over here. I did miss that tackle. What we have said, and this is where I'd encourage you to go on the website. Would encourage a longer discussion. We've got an $80 billion unfunded liability challenge facing us, and that's just on the pension side. It doesn't pick up retiree health care. And in a room like this, I'll ask if there's anybody here who's a retired state employee or a retired teacher. And with all those hands going up, I'm assuming everybody's getting their pension check on time. Second question I have for you, how confident are you that you'll get it in 20 years? And when you look at the amount of commitments that we've made on bonding, the underfunding of the pension liability going back over really 30 years, the extension of the CBAC agreement out to 2027 with the inability to do any layoffs until 2021. This is something we've really got to sit down, and as the question earlier about how you deal with respect, I'm not here to demonize anybody who worked for the state of Connecticut or for a municipality who does it today. We need talented people in state government and in municipal government. But the concepts of the defined benefit promises that have been made and not funded is immoral. And we're really pitting many of you as retirees, in my opinion, against 3-year-olds. So concepts that we've talked about, which need a lot of work beyond my just saying it, is sitting down with the unions and say, look, you're both funds, the teachers' retirement fund and the employee retirement fund, are about 30% of what actuaries say they should be funded at. De facto, they're bankrupt. So would we look at taking something like the state lottery, particularly if we legalize sports betting and contribute that, contribute the proceeds? It might take one of the pension funds up from 30% to 60%. Still a long way to go, but making a significant contribution. Taking all the state-owned real estate, not public parks, but office buildings, rest stops along I-85, seeing how much those are worth if we were to package them and sell them on the open market, and contribute that to the retirement fund. In order to, again, to move this up, where you as retirees and those who are going to retire soon are confident that you're looking out over the next 15 to 20 years, you've got a better level of confidence that those checks that those pension checks will be coming. I just want to the reason I say this is you can't ignore what happened in Central Falls, Rhode Island. You can't ignore what happened in Detroit, Michigan, and you cannot ignore what's happening in Puerto Rico. A state cannot declare bankruptcy today, but if you look at what Congress has done to enable the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico to restructure debt obligations and to restructure their pension obligations, to me, there is groundwork being laid there for some state, ideally not Connecticut, but in Illinois that's in worse shape than we are, to look at that. In exchange for that contribution, though, we would need structural changes. So I would want to have as part of the quid pro quo on that discussions about where we can privatize certain services, where we can move services that are being provided by state agencies today into the not-for-profit sector, particularly into organizations like Oak Hill and the others that deal with the most vulnerable around us, but I think can provide services in a more efficient and easier to change. They're more nimble on their feet. Those are the kinds of things have to be discussed. And if we don't do that, I just think that if we don't start those discussions on November 7th, those of you who follow all this, and I'm sure many of you as retirees do, the CBAC agreement goes out to 2027. When the governor came to organizations like ours and asked for us to champion, to support that extension, which we did not, the argument was that it will come back on a de facto basis in 2020 when all the unions come back to negotiate on base compensation and work rules. And to me, we've got to start the discussions with union leadership on November 7th so that we're not waiting around to 2020 to begin those discussions. It is a long answer. I know brevity is the soul of wit. It's not the soul of my answer, so I apologize for that. But I'd be happy to have any discussion on a longer basis with any of you on it.
Thank you. This is going to be our last question for Mr. Griebel.
Yes, hello, I'm Jan Rosenthal.
My pleasure.
As part of my job, I see people who are on the verge of retirement. As part of my job, I see people who are on the verge of retirement, many of whom are telling me they're leaving the state.
Right.
I used to see more of the wealthy people leaving the state.
Correct.
Now I'm seeing people of more moderate means.
Correct.
Do you have any specific ideas on how to keep those people so they just don't reappear when they're ready for Medicaid?
Well, if climate change keeps going, we may be able to spend 70-degree days in December here, but short of that, the idea, I'll go back to my answer on regional delivery of municipal services. For many people, and certainly for many businesses, the single biggest tax they pay if they own a home is their property tax. And what we've seen over the last 4 or 5 budget cycles is continued cuts to municipal aid, which in most cases has led to some combination of increasing mill rates or reducing services. So you've got the worst of all worlds here, and so one of the ideas we would like to get our arms around, not going to solve this in one budget cycle, but demonstrating to people along the lines I answered earlier about how we're trying to get our arms around that. The second thing is to go, I won't repeat obviously the last answer I gave, but giving people confidence that that we're serious about addressing the unfunded liability issue, so that taxes overall, whether it be personal income tax, sales tax, gasoline tax, are being under control, so that individual who's now in essentially a fixed income, Social Security and whatever other retirement resources they have, which are basically static. That's not going to change for them. That we're serious about either eliminating or reducing the increase in fixed costs. That's what everybody's about, because people who move to South Carolina or Florida, if they're moving for tax reasons, they're primarily moving because there's no personal income tax, and property tax is done very differently. And I'll just say this is the last thing I'll just say to kind of wrap this up in the way we think. This state is an extraordinary state. And I say this in 2 ways. We have to recognize fiscally, as I said a minute ago, we don't have a lot of open space here. We're not bringing a 5,000 person car manufacturing company here. That's not what this state wants. This state prides itself on its open space, its parks, its higher education, its K through 12 education. That costs money. And we have to have honest discussions about how we spend the money. Because what I hear from people more often is not so much that their taxes are going up, it's their frustration on how the tax dollars are spent. And that's the honest discussion that Monty and I offer in this campaign. It's what we'll offer when we're sworn in January. And so what we say to all of you is, we're providing, for probably the first time in the history of Connecticut, a legitimate third choice on the ballot. You have a chance to take Connecticut back from the 2-party system that for 30 years has resulted in no net job growth, increases in taxes, and out-migration. So November 6th, go all the way down to that bottom line and vote Oz Griebel and Monty Frank. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Mr. Griebel. We're going to take about a 3-minute break, and our next candidate will be Mr. Stefanowski.
Thank you. All right, without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Bob Stefanowski, Republican candidate for governor. Thank you for joining us.
So thank you very much for having me. What a great crowd. Wow. I see my wife way in the back row. It's an honor to be here today. Thank you for taking the time. I think I'm number 2 out of 3, so I'll try to stay on schedule. I really want to do 3 things. One is give you a brief update on my background. Not for too long, but talk a little bit about how faith has influenced my life. Talk a little bit about my economic policy, what I think we need to do to fix the state, and then leave plenty of time for questions. So just very quickly to start, I grew up in New Haven, Connecticut. My dad went to Hillhouse High School. He was a class of 1948. He was with my mom for about 60 years. And he still lives in the same house. He's 88 years old. He still lives in the same house that I grew up in. And, you know, God love him. He goes up and down the stairs. He actually showed up, my campaign headquarters is in Brantford, and he drove himself over the other day, and I've got 3 older sisters. They were like, oh my God, Dad shouldn't be driving at 88, but he's just an amazing example of somebody who's been successful in this state. I went to the public schools. Most of my career was at General Electric. I was also the chief financial officer of UBS Investment Bank, where we had a $500 billion business across 35 countries. And I'm proud of what my dad did. I'm proud of what I accomplished. I'm proud of the family that I built here in Connecticut. I met my wife Amy in Hartford at Price Waterhouse. I've got 3 beautiful daughters. And you often get the question, why are you running for one of the toughest jobs probably in the entire country? And I don't think young kids today have the opportunities that I had. I'll tell one quick story. Campaigning is tough. You're up at 7 a.m. and you're usually home about midnight. And I haven't seen my kids much over the summer, but the other night I got home, it was about 11 o'clock, and my oldest daughter, Lauren, was still awake. And she went to school in California, and she's a social welfare major, and she's just a terrific kid. She's got a great heart. She wants to help people. And she's been home for about a year now. And it's been great having her going through the campaign, but we're kind of mutually talking that maybe it's time to fly the nest, which is always hard, but it's the right thing to do. And I said, what do you think you want to do? And she immediately said, I want to go back to California. And, that's interesting because she has friends here, she has her family here, but she realizes there's not opportunity. Certainly not in the field that she wants to do. House prices are depreciating rather than appreciating. And part of my running is selfish. I really don't want to have to get on a plane someday to go see my grandkids in Florida or California. So I think we've got a plan to fix the state. I'm proud of what the state of Connecticut provided to me, and I think I can bring it back to what it used to be. In terms of faith, I'm Catholic, and I'll go through 3 examples. My mom was tough. We went every Saturday at 5:30, and then we went out as a family afterwards. We had dinner together, and there were all these rules. You couldn't eat an hour before you went to Mass, and if you did, you couldn't have communion. If you weren't there by the time the gospel was said, it didn't count. And I can remember when I got my license, and I used to, because she'd quiz me after, what was the gospel? When I got my license, I would go quick, read the gospel, and then leave. I'm ashamed to admit it, but you know what it taught me? It taught me discipline. It taught me family values, spending that time every Saturday with my 3 older sisters and my 2 parents. It taught me accountability. And I think in this world right now, we could use more accountability, we could use a little bit more discipline, and we could use that values that it taught me. The second example is I went to Fairfield University, which is a Jesuit school, obviously in Fairfield, Connecticut. And what I learned there was kind of the value of community, giving back to the community, integrity, the value of faith in leadership, treating people with respect, hiring a diverse management team, respecting values that are different than yours. You don't always have to agree with everybody, but you do need to treat them with respect. You need to listen to them. Fairfield was great at that. Very community-based, giving back to the community. A lot of the kids went on to do missions overseas and things of that nature. So Fairfield taught me the value of integrity, leading by example, and really being broader than just an accountant or an engineer or whatever your field is, being kind of a well-rounded person that cares about what's going on around them. And then the last one is a tough one for me. My mom passed away about a year ago, and they were together, my mom and dad, for about 60 years. They started dating when they were in high school. And the last couple of years she had dementia, so she was back at home. And I had a great upbringing. I'm not trying to give you a story about how poor I was or whatever, but you know, my dad he worked at the phone company for 40 years, and he ran the scoreboard at the Yale Bowl for about 40 years. And we never bought a new car. It was always a used car. We had 1 week of vacation a year. It was up on a lake in Polun Springs, Maine, strangely enough, given that I'm Polish. But and when she started to falter, we had home health care come in, and he was paying $5,000 a week. And this is a guy who never spent money his entire life. And I remember sitting down with him and saying, "Dad, you sure you want to do this?" Because my mom, towards the end, it was pretty bad. She wasn't really that aware of her surroundings. And he said, "You know, Bob," he said, he calls me Robbie, he said, "You know, Robbie, when we got married and I told your mom it was for better or for worse, that's what I meant." And again, having that accountability, having that discipline, having that sense of responsibility is really important to me. So let me flip to the economy quickly. We have a lot of issues, obviously, in this state. But I am a firm believer that we have taxed people in our state to the point we're leaving. And whether you're a family or whether you're a business or whether you're a government, you cannot tax and spend your way into prosperity. You simply can't do it. And I think we need to invest in education. I was a product of the public schools. We certainly need to invest in healthcare, elderly healthcare. I saw what my mom went through. I saw what it did to my dad's life savings. We need to invest in the cities. One of the reasons my daughter wants to probably not be here is we don't have vibrant cities in the state of Connecticut. But the fundamental difference that I have, that I think from what others are saying, is it's not more taxes. It's just not. We've had 8 years of that with our current governor. We've had 2 of the larger tax increases in the history of the state of Connecticut, and tax revenues are down. So we need to invest in education. We need to give people the opportunity that I had. But it's not by raising taxes. Strangely enough, it's by reducing taxes. And we have 80 people on average a day leaving the state of Connecticut. We are the second highest taxed state in the nation. You have to work between January 1st and May 3rd just to pay the government and state. After that, the money's yours. It's 2 weeks later than any other state in the nation. We need to create an environment where people are not leaving. We need to create an environment where companies want to be here, where they want to create jobs, where they want to be part of this state. And that's going to have the opposite effect. We can actually grow this economy. It's not impossible. And we're seeing the exact opposite of that right now. So for me, it's common sense. If raising taxes is lowering your tax base because people are moving out like crazy, you got to lower taxes and get people back in and start to build this economy back up. Before 1991, we didn't have a state income tax in Connecticut. We were the fastest growing state in the entire country. That tax comes in 1991. We're third worst in economic growth. We're the only state that hasn't recovered the jobs from the Great Recession. We got I go on forever. I mean, you guys experience it. The fourth worst roads and bridges. We've got a $100 billion problem in our state employee pension plan. We're stepping into a $2 billion budget deficit. This Connecticut is screaming for change. And that's what I'm going to bring. I'm going to get rid of the estate tax. First of all, I don't think it's morally correct that you're taxed on the money once, and then if you want to leave it to your kids, you're taxed on it again. Second of all, it's a dysfunctional tax. We lost $6 billion of income that could have been taxed just to the state of Florida over the last 6 years for people trying to avoid an estate tax that generates less than 1% of the revenue. We're losing more on that tax than what it's bringing in. The corporate tax, we have to get that down. We are driving companies out of this state by excessive regulation, high taxes, and strangely enough, lack of skilled workforce, which is amazing. So we can do that. We can get rid of this state income tax over 8 years. I'm not going to do it day one. But we lived, quite honestly, without one. We did very, very well. We can gradually start to bring that down. We have a $40 billion biannual budget in the state of Connecticut. Is there anybody in this room that doesn't think I can find 5% of waste? I start with the Department of Motor Vehicles. There's got to be a better way to do that. You need to take a half a day off work to get your license renewed. I can start to use those savings to fund a tax cut. That tax cut will stop people from leaving. It'll actually start to attract people in. It'll get this economy moving. And we can start to dig out of this death spiral that we've had for the last 8 years. But the answer is not more of the same. There's a ton of waste, fraud, and abuse in government that we can go after. And I'm all for having a bus from New Britain to Hartford, but not at $1,000 an inch. $600 million for a 9-mile busway. I'm all for racquetball courts. I'm all for investing in groceries. But when the governor goes through his bonding authority and gives money like that away when we're in a state that's essentially bankrupt, it's not the right thing to do. So fiscal discipline, conservative policies, a business person who's actually runs, I ran a $500 billion business at UBS, and I promise I'll open it up for questions soon. This is therapeutic for me, I go on for hours, but we need somebody that's run something that size. This is a big, complex workout that whoever the governor is going to be stepping into. I've been doing big, complex workouts for the last 30 years. So we can get the policy down, we can get the economy moving, we can use that growing economy to invest in education and healthcare and all the things that we should absolutely be investing in. But we have to have some change. I'm going to bring that change. I'm going to bring values. I'm going to bring leadership. I'm going to bring integrity. And if I'm lucky enough to be elected, I will hope to be that you're proud of the governor once I get all that done. So thank you for listening. I will open it up.
Thank you. Who has questions for Mr. Stefanowski? We have right up front, and after that, we'll take the orange shirt and prepare on.
Mr. Stefanowski, thank you. I have two concerns which you already addressed to some extent. One is the manufacturing jobs. We take in August, we have estimated 9% of manufacturing jobs. And I think in Connecticut we can say 5% of manufacturing. It's really a shame that manufacturing state, like Connecticut, will lose in manufacturing. At that time, they job and so on. Second concern, people of my age. I just read recently that Lexington Bank in Connecticut, second highest in the United States after Alaska. People like me, we cannot afford the Lexington, we can't compete, we can get the Lexington. What we should do? How we can address people of my age who may not to get to the Lexington? That's my first question.
I will repeat. Okay. So the two questions are about the manufacturing economy and the cost of nursing home care in Connecticut. Yes? Thank you.
Yes, so thank you for that. Those are two very, very important topics. Manufacturing used to be the heart and soul of our state. And when I meet with mid-sized businesses, and a lot of those are subcontractors to people like United Technologies and Pratt & Whitney, and it's the backbone of our economy. I will start with where I started. If you're running a manufacturing company, what do you want? You want a reasonable tax environment. We don't have that right now. You want access to skilled labor. And we should be promoting more kids to go to trade schools. I'm not saying a 4-year college degree is not a good thing. It's a great thing, but it's not for everybody. And when I talk to mid-sized businesses, they want machine tools, they want engineering, they want drafting skills. We need to work better with the trade schools to do that. But the most important complaint I get is we need a stable planning horizon. If you're running a business, you want to know what things are going to be like 6 months and a year from now. Otherwise, you have no way to plan your business. And under this last 8 years, people have had no planning horizon. Education funding gets cut mid-year. Taxes just pop out of the woods. So we have to create a stable environment. It's economic policy. Your second question on healthcare for the elderly, as I said, it touches me personally. I'm not a big fan of government-run healthcare. I don't think that's the answer. I think it's the private sector. I think we need to provide more opportunities for living at home for less cost. Maybe you live at home with 24-hour surveillance. We need to invest in the rest care facilities. We need to provide people with a way to save, you know, at the option of the company. I'm not going to mandate it, but at the option of the company, if people want to provide that health care, to save for health care. But we need more competition. But we need to provide more affordable, more options, less costly health care. It involves working with the pharmaceutical companies, the doctors, the insurance companies, and providing more access for people. But it's a big, big issue.
Thank you. In the orange, and after that?
Yes, what's your position on the highway tolls?
I'm against them for a few reasons. Number one is we can't just put them on the borders. If we did, we lose a ton of federal funding. Secondly, there's too many taxes on people already in our state, and we don't need another one. Third is the last time we did that, and to me it's a symptom of government that you have to create a lockbox because you can't trust government to do what they say they're going to do with the money, so you put it in a lockbox. And then what happens when the general fund is depleted? They raid the lockbox. So I don't think that's the answer. 70% of the people on I-95 are in-state, not out-of-state. The proposal to just tax out-of-town trucks, first of all, I think it's going to be everybody before you know it. And second of all, Rhode Island is being sued right now just for that plan. I think we need to bring the private sector in with infrastructure. We need to be very, very careful. You need to know how to negotiate so that you don't get an excessive return. I've been doing it for 30 years. Other states have done it. We don't have the money in the state budget to do it. There's a ton of private sector money out there to help. I use the example of I-95. What's one of the things that works reasonably well on I-95? The rest areas. You know, the McDonald's, and they're pretty clean. They're open 24 hours. They're reliable. You know why? The private sector runs it. So having that mentality of running this government like a business, I think will be a good thing. You look at what Charlie Baker's been able to do in Massachusetts. We could use some of that here.
So first you, and then over here, Leon.
Hey, in August, there was a candidate forum on climate change and more broad environmental issues. All three of your opponents attended, which was not to. So I'd like you to tell us, what's your position on climate change, and how do you propose to address Connecticut's role in mitigating this growing crisis?
I mean, obviously we have a problem. I don't understand the science of it, but there's enough data points to know that there is a problem. I think the impact of the federal government on that is going to be a lot more than the state, quite honestly. And I've been very focused, and I'll be honest, I get some criticism for this. I'm focused on what we can do for the state of Connecticut. We certainly need to be sent. I can tell you don't like my answer, I get it. But, you know, we got an economy here that's about to fall off a cliff. And if we don't get this economy moving, we're not going to have any money to invest in mitigating climate change. We're not going to have any money to invest in education. We're not going to have anything. And I'm running for governor of Connecticut. And I'm being straight up on that for a year. You may like it, you may not like it, but I'm going to get this economy moving. It's going to be my #1 focus. And the benefit that we get from that can be used to help all these very legitimate concerns that people have.
We're going to go here to the aisle, and then in the back, the white t-shirt.
Thank you.
5 or 6 rows away.
My name is Tom Carvin. I'm a retired state employee. My pension is about, after taxes, is about $2,200 a month. The current and the Yankee Institute have made state employees and retirees scapegoats for the problems of the state. I want to know if you're aware of the concessions state employees have made through the State Employee Bargaining Agent Coalition in the last 2 negotiations.
Another great question. You guys are, you're well prepared. I am aware of it. You've given billions of dollars of concessions. You also contributed into a plan faithfully for probably decades, hoping that, you know, everything would be fine. There's a bunch of governors, including Republican governors, that haven't funded it. I think we need to keep people's retirement secure. But I'm not doing my job as governor. Including the debt, this plan is underfunded by $100 billion. almost $30,000 per man, woman, and child in the state of Connecticut. I'm not doing my job if I ignore that problem. What I can tell you is I'm going to be fair. I will recognize the concessions that you've made. I think we would try to protect people's retirement. I think there's some things we can do on an optional basis about getting an early buyout from the defined benefit plan and putting some of that money into a defined contribution plan. I do think we need to look at things like COLA adjustments. We've been in a deflationary period and there's COLA adjustments, but I'm being painted sometimes as this, person who's gonna, be difficult with it. We have to address the problem. We need to be fair about it, but to ignore the problem right now, those checks are gonna start to bounce someday. I'm not doing the employees any good. I'm not doing the people of Connecticut any good if we don't face up to it. Everybody's gotta be part of the solution here, but we have to address it. We really do. But we need to try to be fair, and we need to. No, that's not correct. I'm going to try to work with employees to find a fair compromise.
All right, thank you. We have over here, and then next we'll take Rabbi Small afterwards.
Bob, I have a 5-second question. May I please get a lawn sign?
How do you get one?
Seems like a yes or no question. All right, let's go. And after that, stay in that row and the gentleman with the vest.
Over here, Rabbi David Small, Emanuel Synagogue, and welcome over in the second row, over here to your left.
Oh.
Hi. Two of the states that have been mentioned as successful in recent years are California and Massachusetts. Could you please talk about what you think has contributed to their success, what policies that you would emulate, and what conditions are different in Connecticut that don't transfer over from either state?
Yeah. I'm not so sure on California. Massachusetts, certainly. Having a business person run a state and come in, exert some discipline, exert some budgeting, holding people to a budget, tax reform, bringing taxes down, corporate reform, creating an environment where business wants to be there, skilled workforce. One of the reasons there were a bunch of reasons GE left for Boston, but one of them was access to skilled labor. You think about the colleges, universities, and trade schools that we have in this state, and we lose a company because of access to skilled labor, that simply should not be happening. So to me, and it gets back to the economy. My wife's tired of hearing the story, but I'll tell it one last time. When Dan Malloy came to GE and said, we're leaving, the last meeting with GE, this was the one to convince GE to stay. They put a PowerPoint presentation on the table. Here's why you should stay, GE. It had a picture of a jet engine on the cover. It was a Pratt & Whitney jet engine, not a GE jet engine. That's the end of the meeting. You're done. So I think, back to where I started this whole discussion, discipline, accountability, preparing. You've obviously prepared for this session because I'm getting terrific questions. How do you be the leader of the government and and nobody's held accountable? So business perspective, leadership, tax reform, getting the economy moving, using that improving economy to fund education and healthcare and infrastructure. That's what we're going to do when I win this election.
Thank you. We'll go over here, and after that, we have a question with the blue and the scarf. Gotcha. Over here first.
We could vote for Trump in 2020.
Huh. A lot of rumbling. I'm going to give you my view on President Trump. I think that he's done a terrific job with this economy. Unemployment's the lowest it's been in a long time. He's put America first. I've got 3 daughters. I don't like some of the stuff that comes out. I don't like the tone of some of that stuff. I've been married for 26 years. I may have gotten that wrong, but we could use some of that economic policy in Connecticut. Washington is very partisan. It's very dysfunctional right now. I'm worried about driving the state of Connecticut's economy forward. I'm going to apply some of that tax policy here, and I'm not going to get distracted from what matters to the majority of people that I talk in this state, getting taxes down, getting jobs up, investing in education, and I'm going to be laser focused on that over the next 4 years.
We're going to go here, and the next question we'll take up here in the green shirt. Second row. Towards the aisle.
I think you called on me? Okay, so I appreciate your opening statement about how important it is to treat people with respect, everyone. So I'm wondering, as governor, what do you see your role in influencing our national leaders to treat people, everyone with respect?
I think there's a couple things I can do as governor. When my daughters look at who their role model is, and this is a nonpartisan statement, I would hope that they look to me rather than everybody in Washington right now, because I don't think the last couple of weeks were good for anybody. I'm going to hire a diverse team. Every one of my management teams that I've had has been 50% diverse candidates. I'm going to listen to them. I'm going to lead by example, and I think I've led by example in my life. And people are going to look in my eye and they're going to say, this guy, I may not agree with everything he says, but this guy's straightforward and he's going to do what he says he's going to do. And I'm going to take consensus and I'm going to make a decision and we're going to move this state forward. But I'm going to be worried more about the state of Connecticut than what happens in Washington. You may not like that answer, but we got problems here that we need to address, and I'm going to be laser focused on it.
This is our second to last question. After here, we're going to go right here in the third row.
Here's something I don't understand, and a lot of people online don't seem to get it either. You have told everybody that your economic plan is based on the ideas of Arthur Laffer, is that right?
Yes.
And he's best known for providing the ideas that became trickle-down economics in the Reagan administration. The person that was the cheerleader and the person responsible for implementing that, David Stockman, has totally repudiated trickle-down economics and those ideas and said they don't work. So I'm trying to figure out why you want to bring ideas from a failed plan to Connecticut.
Mm-hmm. It's a fair question. I think every economic policy, whether it's Milton Friedman or Arthur Laffer, is going to have his agreeers and dissenters. I would look at the facts in my mind. We had the greatest economic growth under Ronald Reagan. Arthur Laffer was Ronald Reagan's chief economist. We had to think about when Reagan came in versus Reagan came out. Look at the difference in policy. Look at what the tax cuts, the national economy grew at 4% in the second quarter. We could use some of that growth in here in Connecticut. Tennessee, no state income tax, $1 billion budget surplus. Texas, Florida, we've had 2 or 3 of the highest tax increases in the history of this state, and we're sitting here with a $2 to $4 billion budget deficit. I think tax reform is the way to go. I respect your opinion, but I don't think taxing people anymore right now is the way to get this economy moving. I think we need to do the reverse of what we've been doing, and we need to lower taxes. And I think that benefits everybody throughout the economy.
All right, last question.
I'm a veteran, and I'm very proud of my service to my country. And my 2 sons are veterans. Especially in Connecticut, we were forgotten. In the United States, 22 veterans commit suicide every year. And we go to the VA and, they give us Zoloft and all kinds of drugs. I was one of those veterans, but I just didn't want to do drugs anymore. It didn't feel good, it made my situation worse. So my question is about the opioid crisis in Connecticut, and it's only Connecticut. I care about Connecticut.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you for your service. So we crossed the $1,000-person mark in terms of deaths from what we got at Bruce last year, and it's a massive issue, and we need to get at it. And I think it's a combination of a few things. One is more enforcement of people that are dealing these drugs. The person on the New Haven Green, one of the people that was dealing the drugs, had been arrested 37 times. I think it's working with the healthcare companies. I had a tooth out a few months ago, and I didn't want any Percocet, but I got a bottle with 10 Percocets in it that I never used. Finding alternative ways for pain management. Doesn't need to be opioids. Working with the pharmaceutical companies. Education is a big part of it. So it's an area that we absolutely need to address. I always start with education because I think a lot of times people don't know, but it needs to be a comprehensive solution, working with pharmacies, working more strict penalties for the people that are dealing this stuff, and getting our arms around it, because it's in almost every high school. When I go to different towns around the state, it is almost every high school. Whether it's Greenwich or Bridgeport, it's in every single high school, and we got to deal with it.
Thank you.
Can I just say 2 seconds to wrap up? Sure. Okay. So I just want to thank you. By some of the questions, I can tell I haven't won everybody over in the crowd. I respect that. I can tell you I'm going to do the right thing for this state. I'm going to do the right thing for economic policy, but I'm also firmly believe that a solid economic policy is the best way to invest in education and healthcare and affordable housing and all the other issues that face this state. But if we don't get the economy going soon, there's not going to be anybody here to deal with all of those very important issues. So I very much appreciate you taking the time. I very much appreciate the easy questions and the hard questions. I'm honored to be here, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Outside. Okay, finally this morning, for our third candidate, if everyone could please find your seats. I love the enthusiasm in the room. For our next candidate, I'd like to call up Mr. Ned Lamont. Mr. Lamont is the Democratic candidate for Governor of Connecticut. Thank you. Welcome this morning.
Good morning, Emanuel Synagogue. You've had a long morning. You hanging in there? I'm going to jump right to it. And Deb, thank you so much for inviting me and all of you here, because this is a crucial time for the state of Connecticut. I'm just going to talk for just a few minutes. I really want to take your questions and hear what is on your mind. I just want you to know that this is still the same amazing state it was when we all moved here, with a quality of life, extraordinary values, great school system, and stop bad-mouthing the state of Connecticut. That said, I think we have been let down by a generation of political leadership, going back on both sides of the aisle for 30, 40 years. I know everybody blames everything on Dan Malloy. They blame him for malaria. They blame him for the Lindbergh kidnapping. It goes back 30 or 40 years. It's been a bipartisan train wreck. We haven't invested in transportation. We stopped investing or held back on education. We made promises to state employees and teachers, didn't set aside any money for that. And we can talk about what happened in the past. I don't care. If the question is now, what do we do going forward? And I am running for governor because I think we need a governor who's going to be absolutely fearless when it comes to shaking up the old way of doing business and taking on the entrenched interests in Hartford and making the changes we need to get this state growing again and moving again, and that's what I'm going to do. I think some of you know that's what I've tried to do in my political life. I've mainly been out of the business world, but I was very active in my community, selectmen, Board of Finance. Lowell Weicker put me in charge of the State Investment Board, looking at the pensions. I was there back in the 1990s saying, better put some money away for these pension obligations. The chickens are going to come home to roost. I think many of you met me when I took on not one, but two senior members of my own party. Back in 2006, I took on Senator Lieberman because I thought he was wrong on the war in Iraq. And that did not make the party brass in my own party very happy, but I stood up and I did it because I think it was right, and I think we were right, and I think it was the wrong decision for our country. 4 years later, I did take on Dan Malloy. And I just thought that we needed somebody with a stomach to make the big structural changes we need to get this state moving again. So we had a debate the other day at UConn. I don't know if you saw it. I was there with Oz and Bob, and I spent most of my career, I think, political, taking on two Democrats. Here's my chance to take on two Republicans. I'm making up for a lost time. I think you know that I'm going to stand up and challenge both sides of the aisle when it comes to doing the right thing and let the political chips fall where they may. I'll tell you something else. I think I've done that in my business career as well. I would be the first governor in generations who started a business and created jobs here in a state that's having a really hard time starting businesses and creating jobs. I took on the cable TV industry. I delivered a better service at less cost. And you know, we could use a little bit of that entrepreneurial zip when it comes to how we deliver services in Hartford. And that's what I've got to do. I've got to reduce costs. I've got to hold the line on taxes. I'm not going to raise the income tax. I can't promise you I'm going to eliminate these taxes. We can talk about what the consequences of that would be. We can talk about what we do on the spending side to make sure that we can get our budget honestly balanced for the first time in close to a generation, an honestly balanced budget that doesn't borrow from the future but invests in the future. And that's what I mean to do every day as your governor. Just leave you one other thought. I'm going to reach out. I've got respect of labor. I respect labor, and the folks that do the work in this state, I'm going to thank them every day for what they do. That doesn't mean that folks aren't going to have to get to the table as we try and negotiate an end to this long-term structural deficit. Just a couple days ago, we announced our Business Advisory Board, because I need the business community back actively involved in this state as well. You know, no more knocking the state of Connecticut. And back about 2 years ago, when my friend Ingenuity CEO of Pepsi said Infosys, a major IT computer company, is thinking about moving to Northern Virginia, the Research Triangle, we got them to come up to Connecticut. We got them to visit Hartford. As Ravi Kumar, the president, said, Ned dragged me up here kicking and screaming. And I didn't make the sale, but I was there with Michael Cantor up in his offices, and we had 6 of the leading business folks from the state. And they said, Infosys, if you want to be part of Team Connecticut, we're going to work with you because we believe in this state. And Ravi said afterwards, I thought everybody wanted out of here. I thought the moving vans were revved up, leaving the state of Connecticut. Well, he decided to stay. He decided to commit. Opening up their offices very soon. They had their first job training fair just a couple weeks ago, hiring hundreds of people with IT skills necessary to make sure that our businesses have the job skills they need to keep going. And a week later, due to a variety of reasons, Aetna said, slow down, we're not going to leave. We're going to stay in Hartford. We're going to commit for at least 10 years. And that's how you get this state moving again. We get people working together collaboratively, believing in the state of Connecticut. I'm not going to understate the fact that we have a heavy lift to do when it comes to our fiscal problems. I'm sure we're going to get some questions out of that. I'm going to solve them. I've got a year to do that. And I'm going to do that working constructively with labor and business, Republicans and Democrats. I want to do that early so we spend the rest of my term talking about how we create jobs and get this state moving again. And those are the questions I hope we have a chance to address. So Deb, back to you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. So we'll start with and after that, we're going to go to the gentleman on the aisle, about 5 rows up from the back.
taxes. These taxes come legal fuel tax, raising $12–15 million during Medicare. Even truckers not fill up insider orders under this agreement, every state receives a share of fuel tax based on truck miles in the state.
Sir, could you please answer the question so that others can get questions on?
Your comments on whether the truckers are carrying their weight tax.
Every state in New England, just about every state in the eastern seaboard has an electronic toll, at least on the big tractor trailer trucks, often more than that. Rhode Island just implemented the same thing. Look, our infrastructure, starting with our roads and bridges, are falling down. And this should be one of our great strategic advantages, our location. You know, access to the Middle Atlantic states, access to New England, our ports, our rail, so people can get around. And it's going to take billions of dollars to fix those roads and bridges and have more frequent and regular rail service. Everybody agrees on that. When GE left, they said, you know, reason number 2 we left, we can't even get our folks to the office right now. The gridlock is an enormous strategic disadvantage, and it's driving away jobs. So what do? How do you pay for it? You can borrow more. That's what some of the folks say. They say we're not going to build anything else. We'll just borrow more for it. Some people say we can put it off for another decade. I came up with a solution. May not like the solution, but I have an honest solution how we do this. We put an electronic toll on the big tractor trailer trucks coming in and out of our state. They are the ones that create 90+% of the damage to our roads and bridges. And that will generate about $250 million a year that allows us to at least start fixing and maintaining where we got to be in transportation. I want to see our transportation corridor opened up. I want to see us be able to get from Hartford to New Haven to Stamford to New York in less time. That would just be transformative. The economic development to go along that transit hub would be strategically so important for the state. You talk about New London, you talk about Waterbury, how we interconnect them. And by the way, you want to avoid some of those tolls, tractor trailers, go at off-peak hours. So we'll have a great reduction in the cost then, and that congestion pricing will allow people to get around. But you've got to give people a sense of how we get this state moving again. And one idea is how we fix our transportation system. And I can't do that in a year, I can't do that in a term, but I can give you a sense of where this state's going to be and where we're going. And I think that's what the business community needs. That's what young people need as they're thinking about where they locate. That's what those entrepreneurs need when they say, should I be in Connecticut or somewhere else? And we're going to give you that sense of where we're going. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm curious your stance on the legalization of marijuana and potential revenue to generate for the state.
Wow. I didn't expect this on a Sunday morning. Tolls and weed. Look, the question is very direct. Massachusetts just legalized it. New Jersey's about to vote. New York is doing it. Whatever you think, I think that train has left the station. And at a minimum, I do support the legalization of recreational marijuana. I want to regulate it. I want to know what's out there. I do want to put a tax on it in some way that we can deal. I heard the last question about the opioid crisis. Target those monies for the drugs that are really destructive. I think this is an idea that we can get done early on, and I will pass it.
Mrs. Lamont, you said, Mrs. Lamont, you said that Bob Stefanowski represents harmful values, not Connecticut values. But according to several of my African-American millennial friends in Littleton, you are or have been a member of a Grand Church Club. Is that Connecticut values?
Well, let me just say a couple things. First and foremost, I said I moved to Connecticut for the quality of life. I said I love the assets here. I said I love the people here. I love what this state represents. I also love the values represented by the state of Connecticut. We celebrate our diversity. We respect people who are different from ourselves. We give everybody a shot. We're Yankee independence. I understand that, and I don't think those are the values represented by Donald Trump coming out of Washington, D.C. right now. I don't think those are the values. Brett Kavanaugh was going to be on the Supreme Court, came in yesterday, and look, when it comes to reproductive freedom, when it comes to the environment, when it comes to people with the pre-existing conditions, when it comes to the things that we hold dear, I, as a governor, can make a difference. I can help draw a line. I can help be a firewall to protect the values that we hold dear here in the state of Connecticut. And that's what I mean to do. Look, when it comes to transportation funding, when it comes to having to work with the administration of Washington, D.C., I'm ready to roll up my sleeves and work with people. I'm going to do everything I can to fight for the state of Connecticut. But I'm going to be fighting every day for Connecticut values, and I don't think Donald Trump's Washington represents the values that I care about.
Hi, I've lived this day, moved from New York, Texas, Ohio, been here since '74. It's a wonderful state, we do everything, we're being blessed in New York, but we're losing our companies. Bristol Myers is leaving. Everybody's going either to Princeton or Cambridge, and if they can't afford it, they're gone. How do we keep our companies here? How do we get new companies here?
Excellent question.
If I look disoriented when the questions are coming in, they come in over speakers, so I can't tell the direction. And let me just say, yeah, okay, we lost GE. They didn't go to a state with no income tax. They didn't go to Alabama. They didn't go to Mississippi. They went to Massachusetts, a major metropolitan center there with lots of young people and energy and the skills they were looking for to turn that state around. And so you cannot have a tax system that guts our cities, guts education, cuts transportation. What you need to keep young people here are a couple things. Number one, have thriving urban centers where we can have people live near where they work with affordable housing. That's what I heard when I talked to GE. And let me just give you a slightly different frame. I see the ad, oh mom, there's no jobs here in Connecticut, I'm out of here, this place is. There are tens of thousands of jobs we cannot fill in the state of Connecticut right now. Question is specifically about Bristol Myers. Let me just open up the discussion. I would say one of the reasons they're leaving is they can't get the talent they need right now. We are not training the folks for the jobs they need. When I talk to Jeffrey Geiger at Electric Boat, and he tells me half of the people in our plants were hired in the last 5 years. We're going to have 14,000 new people we have to hire due to attrition or new jobs, and I cannot find the people I need. And if I cannot find those folks in Connecticut, I'm going to go across the river to Rhode Island, where Governor Gina Raimondo has created a community college oriented towards the construction of submarines. We've got to do a much better job of making sure we're training people for the jobs that are out there. Bristol Myers, maybe there are a variety of other reasons they left. GE, went up there. But I want you to know something. We also brought Infosys. There are a lot of companies that are interested in the state of Connecticut. If I train people for the jobs that are out there, I get this transportation system in a way that people know that we're going to be solving that problem. And if we get this fiscal crisis behind us, get that pall of pessimism behind us, I guarantee you not only are folks going to be moving to the state, starting up businesses, starting up jobs, and those moving vans like Aetna are going to turn around.
We're going to go here and then in the black over there. Yep.
I like the waves, thank you.
A little different bent for providing some labor. And I'd like to hear your overall philosophy. I'm talking immigration. We don't have caregivers. We heard that keep people at home. You can't get care. Our universities are now shrinking because the students won't come here anymore because they can't get visas. What's your thoughts on increased immigration to provide skilled workers and sanctuary cities?
I'm a champion for legal immigration. I want people to feel welcome in this state. I want them to come to this state. I love the international companies here, the international students. I want them to be able to say, I was just at UConn the other day. We had a debate, maybe you saw. I was fascinated to find out that 10% of the freshmen in UConn class are Chinese, born and raised in China. So imagine if some of those people with that amazing education could get a visa and could stay in this state. You also mentioned the shortages of caregivers and a lot of folks that we're going to need. Our population's getting older. So I want to have a pathway to make sure that they can stay in this state. I was a volunteer teacher at Harding High School in Bridgeport, Connecticut, probably 20 years ago. And I had a fair number of kids in that accounting class who came to this country as dreamers, quote unquote, not able to speak a word of English. And I was there the day that they got into University of Connecticut and the celebration. And I was also there when they find out that at that point they weren't able to get a scholarship and wouldn't be able to go. So I am going to be doing everything I can as a champion to make sure those folks feel like they belong in our state, a champion for legal immigration, making sure people come to our state. It's amazing. You go around the state, these extraordinary pockets and communities of ethnic pride, and that is what makes Connecticut amazing. So, yeah, these are not Trump values. I do not support his build a wall and keep everybody out. That's not the America I know, and it's certainly not the Connecticut that I love.
So we have here in the black, and then next to David, the red shirt, and the third row by the window.
Hi. I'd like some very specific response to the issue of property taxes and how that is limiting construction, property values. For me, I'm in the homeowner in the state, and my property tax costs me as much as my mortgage. It keeps the value of my property down. I look at places where there's desperate need for gentrification, and fiscally, it makes no sense for a contractor to go in with a slew of employees, by the way, to upgrade that property because the taxes are so high that you can never make a profit. How do you plan to address the problem of ridiculously high property taxes in the state?
Ridiculously high property taxes. First thing, if you eliminate the income tax and you eliminate the corporate income tax and you eliminate all the other taxes that have been promised, representing about 60% of our budget, let me just finish if you don't mind, ma'am. A lot of those costs will get pushed down to our towns and cities. And that will be reflected not only in hits to education, but also driving up property tax, which I think is the exact wrong way to go. So first part of my answer to you is do no harm. The second part of my answer to you on the property tax is I cannot overpromise given where we are in this fiscal situation, but we do have a strategy and a plan that's detailed where we cut property tax for middle-class homeowners by $300 in the first budget and $1,500 in the second budget. Give people confidence. We understand that the high costs of Connecticut, high costs of Connecticut are energy, their tuition, their transportation, and they're also property tax, the biggest tax paid by the middle class. And I'd also tell you something else, it's the biggest tax paid by small business. And one of the plans we have in the first budget, is eliminate the property tax, at least up to, say, $10,000 in equipment. You may say, well, that's not a very big deal, but if you're a small business, it's an enormous deal. It gets out some of the underbrush, so the regulatory underbrush, and allows people to grow and prosper. So I have a very specific plan, A, not to make the situation worse when it comes to the property tax, and more importantly, reduce it in the first two budgets I have.
We're going to go over here in the red towards the window, and after that, we're going to come to Maryland. 3 people in the aisle, about midway down. Just raise your hand so I can see it.
So my question is, I know that you said that you were one of the players in getting emphasis coming to the state of Connecticut. Well, emphasis is an outsourcing company. I worked for Hartford, I worked for Hartford, I lost my job because part of it was outsourced. If you look at Hartford, I would say 75% of the people that are there now are from an outsourced country. So how is that making jobs in the state of Connecticut when it's really a cover for outsourced jobs for these people who come here from other countries who are taking their jobs in Connecticut, and it's implying that we're allowing like this mentality in this business subsidies, or even I now who work for the state of Connecticut, I work with outsourcing people. There are plenty of people here that are IT qualified people that can't find a job, either because of their age now, because they were let go from Hartford travel, and they can't find another job. So that's my question. I prefer not bringing in those kinds of jobs into the state of Connecticut.
Ed Koch once said something great. He said, if you agree with me more than the other guy, give me your vote. If you agree with me 100% of the time, go see a psychiatrist. And I just respectfully, strongly disagree. Infosys is going to be training Connecticut people for Connecticut jobs. Connecticut people for Connecticut jobs. Infosys is going to be making sure that the companies you referred to and other companies around, and Aetna and others, have the folks with the IT skills they need to make sure that these 20th century companies are ready for the 21st century economy. That's one of the reasons GE left. Maybe that has something to do with Bristol Myers as well. We've got to train people for those jobs. This has nothing to do with outsourcing. This is insourcing. Connecticut jobs. We're training the people throughout the greater Hartford metropolitan area. These are going to be Connecticut jobs, ma'am. I promise you that.
After that, you can stay right there. I have a two-part question. For the last 30 years, Hartford area business economists have talked about regionalization, and there is no other way to reduce expenses in this state outside of that, really, realistically, and with a lot of money. Second part is we have Connecticut pensions that have cost of living increases every year. And these cost of living increases are increasing much faster than anything else in this state, and we can't keep up with it. And how do you break those contracts?
Okay, now we're getting down to the nitty-gritty. What do you do about this structural deficit? And you brought up two specific things. Just give me a couple of minutes on this, because in the debates I only get 1 minute. First of all, you mentioned the fact that we have 169 towns, feisty in their independence. Nobody's taken away my authority there. But we also have 169 tax collectors. And we have, well over 150 superintendents and deputy superintendents and a lot of back office and IT and purchasing. And I cannot afford, and you cannot afford, to subsidize inefficiency any longer. So I'll just give you one example. Our school districts, lots of different school districts, as I say, we're one of the very few states in the country where we pay more for administrators outside the classroom than teachers in the classroom. So very specifically, I'm not going to use a club, I'm not going to use a cudgel, but I'm going to give folks the incentives they need to make sure that we start sharing more of these back office tasks to bring down the cost of government. And it's tough. I mean, you talk to Ansonia and Seymour, both of which have smaller schools, and they want to build, thinking about building their own high school. You'd think I was asking the Shias and the Sunnis to think about getting together. But I'll help you build your joint high school, but I'm not interested in subsidizing a lot of smaller schools out there right now. Just the way that I think about that. And I think there's significant savings there, not immediately, but over the next 4 or 8 years. And I'm going to get it done. We've been talking about it for 40 years, like you say. The second question, I might as well cut to the chase, is the structural deficit. You mentioned pensions. I'd also say healthcare. Two costs that are accelerating. We have a 10-year agreement. And what do you do about that? I do see significant savings in healthcare. I do think we're not using our enormous purchasing power. You got to go where the money is. 25% of our costs are related to healthcare in the state of Connecticut. And I think we do some fundamental reforms that would not disadvantage our state employees and teachers, but allow us to bring down the cost. Work hard using our purchasing power to drive down the cost of pharma. Go out to bid for the PBMs like they did in New Jersey, where they saved hundreds of millions of dollars. Look at the fact that some of our systems here in the state hospitals cost a lot more than others. Find ways that people can go to a network that saves us money and provides them a higher quality of service. Look at Medicaid. Look at the fact that we can play into the reinsurance program that brings down the cost of Medicaid, brings down the cost on the exchanges, especially when you take into account insurance for folks with pre-existing conditions. And you also asked about the structural deficit when it comes to pensions. I think I'll be the only person that gives us a real shot to make a change there. I've got the respect of labor. I understand labor. I stopped blaming labor, stopped blaming that 70-year-old teacher. She worked her heart out for the state of Connecticut for 35 years. She worked her heart out. She's now 70 years old. She doesn't have Social Security. The only thing she has to live on is the pension that a governor 35 years ago promised her. You know, that said, and I've said this a lot and I'll say it again, Labor's going to have to be at the table along with business, and Republicans and Democrats. We're going to have to make some of those structural changes we need. You know, I've been, at my own peril, gotten in a little trouble. I've talked about double dipping. I've talked about mileage. I've talked about capping pensions, some of these $200,000 pensions. You know, I think I give us the best chance to do that. You have somebody else going in there saying, I'm going to eliminate all taxes that I pay and other rich people pay, but I can't afford to pay your pension, teacher. That's a job that's not going to get done, and you're going to have 4 years of fiscal warfare. I'm going to make the changes we need to turn it around. I think working in good faith with the people I mentioned gives us the best shot to get that done. Thank you for your question.
We have one last question. It's over here by the room.
Over here doesn't work.
You mentioned a few times that Connecticut's economic problems have been not just because of the governors that have been growing the last 30 or 40 years. The governors have come and go, but there's been one constant, and that's the legislature. So you also mentioned you want to work with labor, you want to work with business, you want to work with municipalities, but I submit that working with the legislature is probably as important, if not more important than all of the above. So I'd like to know, what is the first major piece of legislation that is going to enact your grandiose plans change that you're going to put before the legislature, and how do you propose to get their acceptance of this big change?
So, question about the legislature and how do I work through the legislature. I've talked to a lot of legislators on both sides of the aisle, ma'am. And they came to this state and they came to the legislature not for a $26,000 a year salary, because they wanted to do good and they wanted to make a difference. And over the last 8 years, over the last long period of time, all they've done has been confronted with a fiscal crisis. And they can't solve it. You need a governor to solve that. You know, legislature, they can ratchet up this rate a little bit. They can delete this item out a little bit. Let me finish. I think they want a governor to take the lead. And I've tried to take the lead by talking about the structural deficit. I've tried to take the lead by talking about not only transportation, but how I pay for it. I've talked about how I work with the business community and making sure our interests are aligned and we provide what they need. You want to know the first thing I would do? I would get Themis and Len Fasano in the room with me, along with the Democratic leaders, and I would say, look, we're in this together. And I am going to take the heat for every tough decision we got to make. I will take the bullets. I will take the blame. I will share the credit where we got to do it, but we have got to solve this thing. And I cannot think of any other way to do it. Now, you can maybe say, the problem is the legislature, it's been the Democrats, and I can say John Rowland was no walk in the park. Who cares? You're going to need somebody who actually, in good faith, can make people work together for the first time in a long time. We didn't even have the governor invited into the legislative office building for that last budget, and it was a terrible budget. It was a budget that was balanced on the most vulnerable in our society, and it didn't deal with the structural deficit in any way. I promise you, I'm going to get that solved in year one. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today, Mr. Lamont. Thank you to all of you for joining. And again, thank you to the Emanuel Synagogue Brotherhood, JFAT, and the Jewish Community Relations Council, an arm of the Jewish Federation. And please don't forget to vote on November 6th.